Our brake system is getting an overhaul today. We already installed brake lines, fluid, and pads. If you guys haven't seen that video yet, I'll link it up above. I did that over on the FT Speed channel. But today we're gonna be installing the FactionFab Swept Slot rotors. It's gonna be a nice upgrade over the stock rotors. Gonna get a little bit more heat dissipation and resistance to brake fade out on the track. We're gonna start out on the front, work our way towards the rear. So the process itself is fairly simple. Essentially, all we have to do is remove the brake caliper, and then we should be able to uninstall the old rotor, install the new rotor, and then reinstall the brake caliper. But usually, especially if you live in the Midwest, you'll find that your rotor is gonna be stuck to the hub, but I'll show you a little trick to help remove that. But the first thing we need to do is remove the 12mm bolt that's holding the brake line to your strut. That way we have enough slack so that we can just set the brake caliper on the lower control arm once we have it removed. If you're just changing out your rotors, you can probably get away with skipping this next step, but most people are changing out their pads and rotors, so what we'll need to do is remove these 14mm bolts that are holding the caliper in place. Then we can slide the caliper off, set it on the lower control arm, and you'll have access to the brake pads. Even though I already changed out my brake pads, there is some cleaning I want to do, so we'll need to remove these two bolts. Once the caliper's off, we can remove the brake pads. The next step is removing the two 17mm bolts that are holding the bracket in place. Now in a perfect world, this is where you'd be able to just slide your old rotor off and install your new rotor. But like I said earlier, and being that this is 2020, our rotor is stuck to the freaking hub. So if this happens to you, you can actually take the 12mm bolt that holds the brake line to your strut, and this threads into either of these two holes to help press the rotor out. Now, I actually have a couple bolts that are the same thread pitch. I think it's M8 by 1 1/4, so I'm gonna use these instead so I don't risk damaging the OEM bolt. So we're just gonna thread this on here. There we go. Before we install the new rotor, there's a couple things we need to do. One is to spray down the surface of the rotor with some brake cleaner because they're usually shipped out with some grease to help protect against any corrosion since they don't know how long they're gonna sit on the shelves. So we wanna get rid of that surface of any contaminants. And second, take a look at the surface of your hub here, and if it's really rusty and rough, go ahead and take a metal brush and brake cleaner and smooth it out as best you can and clean up that rust. This will give the rotor a nice flat surface to mate up to. Once we've done that, we can install the new rotor. Then I'll just take a lug nut here and thread it on to hold the rotor in place while I reinstall the brake caliper. We're gonna reinstall the bracket first with the two 17mm bolts. Now keep in mind, all four of the bolts that we removed, Subaru has labeled as one-time use, so ideally you'll want to replace them. And you're gonna torque these two 17mm bolts down to 59 foot-pounds. Now we can reinstall the brake pads. And slide the caliper back on top. For these 14mm bolts, you're going to want to torque them down to 19 foot-pounds. Now we just have to reinstall the 12mm bolt that holds the brake line to the strut. And then we do the same thing on the other side, and we'll move to the rear. So in the rear, it's basically the same process. You remove the caliper and then you can swap out the rotor. Now keep in mind that the e-brake is back here, so obviously you don't want to have that engage, otherwise you're not going to be able to pull off the rotor. Also, this hole right here and this cover is for the e-brake adjustment, so make sure you transfer this rubber cover over. Another thing that is different is instead of the 4 bolts holding the brake system in place needing to be replaced, it's just the 2 bolts that are holding the bracket in place and not the caliper. The torque spec on those 2 bolts that are holding the bracket in are also different. They're 49 foot-pounds instead of the 59 foot-pounds like the front. The 2 bolts that are holding the caliper in place are the same as the front. It's 19 foot-pounds. So I'm going to swap this out real quick, and then we should be good to go. Just finished up the rears. Been sweating my butt off out here. It's really hot. Thankfully, we just had to put the wheels back on and get the car on the ground, then go out and bed in the new brake pads in the rear here. I usually just do about 6 to 10 runs of moderate pressure from about 35 miles per hour, and then a couple hard stops from around 45 miles per hour, and then we should be good. This brake system should be good for the rest of the season. Eventually, probably next year, we'll jump to some more aggressive pads. I still have a bunch planned for this car, so if you're interested in following along on this build, hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up. If you guys have any questions or suggestions on parts you want to see installed on this car, leave it in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time.